Hello and welcome, I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top global stories. Russian President Vladimir Putin orders his forces to stop all military activity in Ukraine, announcing an Easter truce through Sunday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kiev will respect the truce, but accuses Moscow of already violating it. The US Supreme Court temporarily blocks the Trump administration from deporting a group of Venezuelan migrants under a rarely used wartime law. The Trump government urges the court to lift the order. Israeli forces continue striking the Gaza Strip, with 54 people reported killed in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, Hamas says the fate of his Israeli hostage remains unknown after his guard's body is found following an Israeli strike. Iran and the United States agree to begin drafting a framework for a potential nuclear deal. After talks, a top US official calls progress very good. President Trump threatens military action if Iran doesn't swiftly accept a new deal to halt nuclear weapons development. Thousands of anti-Trump protesters take to the streets in communities large and small on Saturday. The demonstrators coincide with the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolutionary War. Houthi-run media reports 13 deadly airstrikes in Yemen. At least 3 people are killed and 4 others are injured in the latest US strikes on Sanaa city districts. Reports say a gunman kills at least 56 people in Nigeria earlier this week in Benue State. The death toll is updated after initial underreporting follow a visit to the scene by the state governor. Oman's Sultan is set to visit Moscow on Monday, days after Muscat-mediated talks between Iran and the United States. The Sultan will hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin set for Tuesday. Our top story today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia is pretending to observe a ceasefire during Easter while continuing attacks on the front lines. In a statement on social media, Zelensky said that although Russia is trying to give the impression of a truce, its forces have not stopped making isolated advances and attempting to inflict losses on Ukrainian troops overnight. He stated that a 30-day ceasefire could have given peace a chance, but noted that President Vladimir Putin had previously rejected a proposal for a full and unconditional halt to hostilities over that period. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin attended an Easter service led by Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, who is a strong supporter of Putin and advocates for the war in Ukraine. Yesterday, President Vladimir Putin ordered a unilateral Easter ceasefire in Ukraine and ordered Russian forces to end hostilities. Let's listen in to what the Russian president said.
Руководствуясь гуманитарными соображениями, сегодня с 18:00 часов до 00 часов с воскресенья на понедельник российская сторона объявляет пасхальное перемирие. Приказываю на этот период остановить все боевые действия. Исходим из того, что украинская сторона последует нашему примеру.
Air raid sirens went off in Kiev and Kharkiv on the beginning of April the 19th, just hours after Putin announced a surprise one-day ceasefire in Ukraine for the Christian holiday. The sirens in Kiev lasted around 15 minutes with no attacks reported. In Kharkiv, the sirens sounded for 3 hours after the ceasefire was supposed to begin. In Kiev, residents attended an Easter Mass, staying inside the church due to the city's midnight curfew. At St. Michael's Monastery, worshippers held the first part of their ceremony outside, with church officials leading a procession before gathering for prayers. Let's hear what residents from Russia and Ukraine had to say about the Easter ceasefire.
Я считаю, что оно ни к чему не приведет. Пасхальное перемирие не приведет к миру. Потому что Потому что Украина все равно не будет соблюдать эти договоренности. Так же, как они сейчас продолжают бомбить эти наши энергообъекты. Понимаете? Мы прекратили вроде бы как, а они как продолжают, так и продолжают.
Розумієте, ця людина не договороспособна, він не вміє домовлятися, він вміє тільки силою брати, він ніколи не піде на домовленість. Так, як ми хочемо, він хоче так, як він хоче. Не буде перемир'я. Дуже жаль. Ночі ми чекаємо в Україні, а особливо в Києві, прильоти ракет. Тому перемир'я не буде.
Let's turn our focus to the Middle East now, where at least 54 Palestinians have been killed in a new wave of Israeli airstrikes across the Gaza Strip, with attacks hitting Gaza City, Khan Yunis, Beit Liaha and the al-Baji refugee camp. In Khan Yunis alone, 11 people were killed when Israeli forces targeted tents sheltering displaced families. The strikes come amid one of the deadliest phases of the war, with nearly 1,700 Palestinians killed since Israel ended a temporary ceasefire on March the 18th and resumed its assault. Meanwhile, Hamas has released a third video of Israeli hostage Elkanah Babot, who was taken during the October 7th attack. Israel has condemned the footage as part of psychological warfare aimed at pressuring the government. In a separate statement, Hamas has also said that it has lost contact with the person responsible for guarding Israeli-American soldier Eden Alexander, who was taken hostage in October as well. The group confirmed that a guard assigned to Alexander was killed in a recent Israeli airstrike, but the fate of the 21-year-old dual citizen remains unknown. Alexander's father, Adi Alexander, says he remains hopeful that his son is still alive. Speaking at a gathering outside Tel Aviv City Hall, he urged the United States to take direct action to help recover the remaining hostages. Families of the captives are continuing to press Israeli leaders for answers and a diplomatic solution to bring their loved ones home. In a national address, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he has ordered the military to increase pressure on Hamas. He vowed that Israel would continue fighting until victory, blaming Hamas's rejection of a recent truce proposal for the renewed escalation. Netanyahu's comments came as protests erupted across the country, with demonstrators clashing with police in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, demanding a deal to bring the hostages back and an end to the war. We once again stay in the region of the Middle East, where the United States and Iran made progress in a second round of high-stakes talks on Tehran's nuclear program on Saturday and agreed to meet again next week. The Oman-mediated talks in Rome lasted for about 4 hours. Tehran's top diplomat Abbas Araghchi declared it a good meeting that yielded progress and stated that they managed to reach a better understanding on a series of principles and goals. Let's take a look at what the Iranian foreign minister had to say.
در ادامه جلسه گذشته این بار هم جلسه خوبی بود و میتونم بگم که رو به جلو هست مذاکرات. ما این بار موفق شدیم در خصوص یک سری اصول و اهداف به یک تفاهم بهتری برسیم و نهایتاً قرار شد که مذاکرات ادامه پیدا بکنه و وارد مرحله.
Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Ismail Baqai said that the parties have agreed to resume indirect talks at a technical level over the next few days and subsequently continue at the level of 2 senior negotiators next Saturday on the 26th of April. The Foreign Ministry of Oman, which is mediating the nuclear negotiations between the United States and Iran, said the two sides were seeking an agreement that guarantees the Islamic Republic does not possess nuclear weapons. Oman also said that the third round would be in Muscat, returning to the state of the first talks a week ago. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has affirmed his commitment to preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, declaring that he would not waver in that effort. Here's what the Israeli Prime Minister had to say about the issue.
אני מחויב למנוע מאיראן נשק גרעיני. אני לא מוותר על זה, אני לא מרפה מזה, ואני לא נסוג מזה. לא.
We stay in the Middle East, where the United States have launched a fresh wave of airstrikes on Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. At least 3 people were killed and 4 injured in strikes on Sanaa's Al-Thawra, Bani, Matar and Al-Safia districts. The US also hit Hodeida's port and airport with 13 airstrikes, just days after a deadly raid on the Ras Isa oil port that killed at least 80 and wounded over 150. CENTCOM says the attacks aim to weaken the Houthis' fuel supply and revenue. The strikes follow repeated Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping, which the group claims are in support of Palestinians in Gaza. Despite mounting casualties, the Houthis have vowed to continue their operations. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he is gravely concerned by the rising death toll. We move to the United States, where thousands of protesters across the United States took to the streets on Saturday, voicing opposition to President Donald Trump's policies. The protests focused on deportations, government firings, and ongoing conflicts in Gaza and in Ukraine. Demonstrations were held in Washington, New York City, Chicago, and other areas of the United States. Outside the White House, protesters chanted, "Trump must go now," calling for action on deportations and solidarity with federal workers fired under the Trump administration. Since his inauguration, President Trump, along with his ally Elon Musk, has overseen the firing of over 200,000 federal workers and efforts to dismantle key agencies. The administration has also targeted universities and detained foreign students, further fueling nationwide protests. This marks the second consecutive day of nationwide demonstrations since Trump took office. Let's take a listen to what some of the protesters had to say.
Due process. That's the first thing they come for, is to take away our due process. And if you folks think here today that you're safe, they're just coming for the weak, the powerless, the students, the immigrants. They're not. They're coming for anybody who stands up against them. Law firms, universities, anybody who resists, they come for. So do not be misled, do not be mistaken. This is happening here in our country today. Fascism. Trump is taking Joe Stalin's playbook and using it. So let's not kid ourselves. Let's be real about the task at hand, about what's going on. Thank you.
I think that people are rising up all over this country for good reasons, and I am here to be part of that uprising and to protest all the, especially the deportations, the grabbing of people who are here legally and legitimately and throwing them in.
More news on the Trump administration. 3 former senior advisors to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth were escorted out of the Pentagon over what they called baseless attacks following an investigation into information leaks. Dan Caldwell, Colin Carroll and Darren Selnick were among 4 officials from Hegseth's inner circle who were removed this week. In a joint statement, the 3 expressed disappointment in how their service ended, stating that Pentagon officials had slandered their character. They also said that they had not been informed about the nature of the investigation, its status, or whether the alleged leaks were ever truly investigated. The Shape Cup comes less than 100 days into the Trump administration, which has already seen controversy within the Pentagon, including the removal of senior staff and orders to purge content promoting diversity, equity and inclusion. Additionally, last month, Hegseth revealed that the Pentagon's intelligence and law enforcement arms were investigating leaks of national security information, triggered by reports about Elon Musk's potential classified briefing on war plans with China. These departures follow the recent firings of federal high-ranking military officials, including Joint Chiefs Chairman General C.Q. Brown and Chief of Naval Operations Lisa Franchetti. Let's move on once again. A Soyuz MS-26 spacecraft carrying Russian cosmonauts Alexei Ovchinin and Ivan Wagner and astronaut Pete Donald Petit returned to Earth after they concluded a 7-month research mission aboard the International Space Station. A NASA video showed the craft landing in Kazakhstan after its descent was slowed by a parachute and ground crews carrying the crew from the spacecraft. Russia's Roscosmos space agency said in a post that its deorbiting and descent to Earth were normal. They orbited the Earth 3,520 times over 220 days in space. According to NASA, they have been conducting research to enhance in-orbit metal 3D printing capabilities, advance water sanitation technologies, explore plant growth under varying water conditions, and investigate fire behavior in microgravity. Let's look at more from the diplomatic world. French President Emmanuel Macron will reportedly be given a state visit to the UK before Donald Trump's expected visit in September. The French president received an invitation from the King to travel to the UK at the end of May, which would be Macron's first state visit to the UK. It comes after US President Donald Trump suggested Buckingham Palace was setting a date for September for him to meet the King. Previously, US presidents who have already made a state visit, such as George W. Bush and Barack Obama, usually have tea or lunch with the monarch at Windsor Castle. But Starmer handed Trump what he had described as a truly historic personal invitation from the King for a second state visit, when he visited the White House in February. We move over to South Asia, where tens of thousands of Afghans have been expelled from Pakistan this month, with over 8,000 having left ahead of April the 30th deadline, according to the United Nations. Islamabad has intensified its campaign to remove undocumented Afghans, saying it can no longer shoulder the burden. Taliban officials say that up to 2 million people may be forced out in the months ahead. In response, Afghanistan's Prime Minister has strongly condemned what he called Pakistan's unilateral measures, warning that they are complicating efforts for a coordinated repatriation. He urged Islamabad to facilitate a dignified return of Afghan refugees. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq visited Kabul yesterday for talks aiming to defuse the tensions. Islamabad accuses Kabul of sheltering terrorists responsible for cross-border attacks and claims that the Taliban has rejected. Despite diplomatic outreach, Pakistan insists that the deportation deadline will not be changed. Returning families, many of whom have lived their entire lives in Pakistan, are saying that they are being forced to abandon their homes, belongings and future. Let's listen in to what some migrants had to say.
زه خو بچو لپاره دلته مشته وم بچو باندې به سبق ویلې سکول مې ویلې خو چې دلته که سکول خو په وبه وایم که نه سکول بیا به نو اوسي نو.
We stay in South Asia. Rescuers carried out efforts for over 12 hours after a building collapsed in India's New Delhi and killed at least 11 people. A rescue official says 22 people have been rescued after the collapse took place at around 3 a.m. local time. The Delhi police has shared the list of the deceased and the injured in the tragedy. According to the list, the 60-year-old landlord of the building has also died in the collapse. Delhi Chief Minister Rekha Gupta has expressed grief over the lives lost in the building collapse. She has confirmed that a probe into the reasons for the devastating incident has been initiated and rescue teams from various agencies are engaged in search and rescue operations. Let's move over to the South American continent now. 12 people have been killed in an attack at a cockfighting ring in Ecuador. Police say 4 suspects have been arrested following the attack in La Valencia, a community in Manabí province. The attackers, allegedly wearing replica police and army uniforms, opened fire on spectators, causing panic as crowds scrambled for cover. Authorities seized weapons and fake military gear during raids carried out the following day. Local reports suggest the gunmen were members of a criminal gang targeting rivals believed to be attending the event. A criminal investigation is now underway as Ecuador battles escalating gang violence. Let's take a listen in to what the police colonel had to say.
Efectivamente, en horas de la noche y madrugada hubo un evento violento en este lugar, en esta gallera, en donde teníamos 12 personas fallecidas. Hubo un ataque armado, presumiblemente de una GDO, aquí en el lugar. De igual manera, hubo personas heridas. Se encontraron uniformes de equipo militar botados en la vía. Encontramos un vehículo que fue uno de los que intervinieron en este ataque armado. Estuvo volcado al filo y al costado de la carretera. Kilómetros más adelante encontramos el otro vehículo interviniente en este hecho violento que estaba incinerado.
We stay in the Indo-Pacific. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has said his government will prioritise fairness in talks with the US on exchange rates and trade as pressure mounts from Washington. Speaking on national broadcaster NHK, Ishiba addressed growing concerns over President Donald Trump's push to include currency policy in bilateral trade negotiations. Trump has accused Japan of weakening the yen to boost exports, a charge Tokyo firmly denies. Ishiba said that any currency discussions would be handled by Finance Minister Katsunobu Kato and the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The Japanese leader hinted at potential flexibility on a long-standing US complaint about non-tariff barriers in the auto sector. Meanwhile, Japan is reportedly considering relaxing vehicle safety standards for American cars, a move seen as a goodwill gesture amid ongoing tariff threats. Trump has already imposed a 24% tariff on Japanese exports, with additional duties still on the table. Finance Minister Kato is set to travel to Washington this week for G20 meetings and is expected to hold key talks with his American counterpart. Ishiba also made it very clear that Japan's $1 trillion in US Treasury holdings won't be used as leverage in trade talks, stressing that trust and stability are paramount. 6 people have now died in drowning incidents along the east coast in Australia. The latest victim, a fisherman, was swept off the rocks near Watamala Beach, south of Sydney. Emergency services winched 2 people from the surf, but 1 man could not be revived. A 14-year-old boy survived and is recovering in hospital. The weekend has been marred with dangerous surf conditions, with massive swells prompting warnings from Surf Life Saving Australia. On Friday alone, 3 people drowned in New South Wales. A woman died and a man disappeared after being swept out to sea in Victoria. Saturday saw another fisherman lose his life in similar conditions. Surf Life Saving Australia is urging beachgoers to prioritise patrolled areas. The organisation says more than 600 people have died at unpatrolled beaches over the past decade. We stay in the Indo-Pacific, where, according to reports, North Korean 170mm self-propelled artillery systems have been deployed to Russian territory at a base near the Ukrainian border. Allegedly, Pyongyang appears to have been continuously supplying weapons to Moscow throughout the latter's aggression against Ukraine and supporting the Russians' military fight on the front lines as it faces a shortage of arms and ammunition. This comes after North Korea denounced the United States President Donald Trump's recent order to ease weapons exports, calling the decision war escalation measures. North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency issued the criticism on Sunday in an unnamed commentary, taking issue with Trump's April 9th executive order mandating a review of rules governing US military equipment exports. The KCNA alleged that while the United States pretends to be a mediator by recommending dialogue and negotiation, it simultaneously hands over weapons of mass destruction to encourage countries to expand and prolong conflicts. A Boeing jet originally headed for China has returned to the US due to escalating tariffs between Washington and Beijing. The 737 MAX, painted in ex-Mayan Airlines colours, landed at Boeing Field in Seattle after a long journey back from China. The aircraft made stopovers in Guam and Hawaii before reaching its destination. It had been waiting at Boeing's Houston Completion Center in China for final delivery. But with Washington raising tariffs on Chinese goods to 145% and Beijing retaliating with 125% duties on US imports, experts say delivering the plane now comes with major financial risks. The US-China trade war is once again affecting aviation. A 737 MAX jet, originally bound for China's Xiamen Airlines, has been landed back at Boeing's Seattle hub. At a market value of about $55 million, the import taxes could be crippling. Neither Boeing nor Xiamen Airlines has commented. We bring you some breaking news now. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense reported the detection of 1 Chinese military aircraft, 6 naval vessels and 3 official ships operating around the island of Taiwan. The PLA aircraft breached the Taiwan Strait median line and entered the island's southwestern air defense identification zone. Taiwan responded by dispatching aircraft, mobilizing naval ships and activating land-based missile systems to track the activity. We will continue to bring you more news updates on that developing story. We move on once again. Christians across the Orthodox world marked Easter this weekend with midnight vigils and solemn prayers. In Moscow, Patriarch Kirill led the Easter Mass at the Christ the Saviour Cathedral. President Vladimir Putin attended the overnight service alongside Moscow's mayor. Easter, the most sacred Christian holiday, was celebrated with processions, candles and chants of Christ has risen indeed. In Ukraine, worshippers gathered at St. Michael's Monastery in Kiev. Due to curfew restrictions, they remained inside the church until dawn. Despite a ceasefire announced by Putin, air raid sirens rang out in Kiev before and after the deadline. President Zelensky dismissed the move as a game with human lives. Meanwhile, Russia and Ukraine carried out a major prisoner swap. Each side released 246 captives in a deal brokered by the UAE. Russia says its freed prisoners of war are now receiving care in Belarus. Easter in Greece lit up the night sky and shook the streets with fiery tradition and flying pottery. On the island of Chios, rival churches reignited their famous rocket war. Worshippers from Panagia, Etherani and St. Mark's launched hundreds of homemade fireworks at each other, aiming to strike their opponent's church bell. The dramatic ritual dates back to the 19th century during the Ottoman rule. Once involving cannons, the spectacle now uses fireworks made months in advance. Meanwhile, in Corfu, thousands gathered to witness the Botides tradition. Residents tossed large clay plots off balconies, smashing them on the streets below. Locals believe the crashing jugs drive away evil spirits and bring good luck. The ritual, known as the First Resurrection, is deeply rooted in Corfu's Venetian past and draws visitors from across Greece and beyond. Orthodox Christians around the world marked Holy Saturday with deeply symbolic traditions, from Jerusalem to Bethlehem and even a small Czech village. In Jerusalem, the Holy Fire ceremony lit up the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, with the flame, believed to be a divine miracle, was passed from candle to candle, filling the ancient church with light. Greek Orthodox Patriarch emerged from the tomb with the first flame, said to be sparked by a sunbeam inside the church. Pilgrims packed the narrow streets to witness the sacred moment. In nearby Bethlehem, the Holy Fire arrived at the Church of the Nativity, but this year's celebrations was subdued, with no marching bands and a smaller crowd, reflecting the ongoing war in Gaza. Meanwhile, in the Czech Republic, villagers revived the marching Judas tradition. A boy dressed up in a straw suit and paraded through the town, with children collecting sweets and coins before the Judas figure was symbolically burned. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.